Yeah, so hopefully that's a one and done on my part of forgetting to record things from a couple weeks ago, but grateful to have you guys this morning. I'm me and my shadow here in the training room this morning. So good to see your guys right here. But as you know, or hopefully you know, most of you know, we got basically through paragraph 5 Tuesday. And again, that's as we go through this contract overview, remember that all these classes are being recorded. So you can always go back and go to the agenthub.searchcharlottesville.com and go down to the AHA area, click on that, and we keep all those in one place so that you've got a question about paragraph 6 or paragraph 14 or whatever, you can go and find it and rewatch what we're doing. And then also remember that that at the end of this, I will give you a case study of a property and have you guys, write your own contract with the information I give you, and then you'll turn that into me, and I'll make any suggestions that I need to make on it. And that way you'll have a cheat sheet going forward that if you have somebody who's ready to buy a house and you're gonna write a contract, or you're working with a seller, you'll know the things that you need to be aware of when you're going through that contract. Just as an example, like we talked about on Tuesday in paragraph 5, when contract comes in and you're the listing agent representing the seller, you need to know in paragraph 5 that after 30 days or whatever is written in there as it relates to the finance contingency, you and the seller are the ones that have to notify the buyer and says, hey, we need to get that commitment letter from you. That's just an example of really understanding the contract so that we represent people as best we can. And then secondly, Logan Claylow has a contract on her listing on Lomo Lane. Good example of the fact that the market is picking up, because that house was in a good location at a good price, and she had a whole bunch of people look at it over a couple days and had 2 contracts on it, sold for over list price. And but one of the contracts came in and it wasn't this contract. It was a contract from Northern Virginia. That contract is different than the Virginia Realtor Association contract that we use. And so if that happens to you with one of your listings, you're not going to know all the ins and outs of that contract like you know this one, because we won't have trained on that one, right? So one of the things that I shared with Logan is it turned out that contract didn't win. But if that contract had won, one of the recommendations I would have made is to accept the offer that they made, but put it onto our contract and send it back to that agent. And basically say, hey, you're in our sandbox, therefore you're going to play by our rules. And we want to have a contract that I can be totally sure of that I'm communicating to the seller as best as I can. So just a couple tidbits there for you. We're paragraph 6, and this is an interesting paragraph because it talks about FHA and VA. If you look at the bottom of page 3 of your contract, 6 says VA/FHA loan, and it immediately goes to A. So that's if we're looking at the bottom of the last page, it would say VA/FHA loan. And what this is talking about is how FHA and VA financing different than in paragraph 5. And how is it different? Well, again, VA is a guaranteed loan. It can be up to 100% down. The seller can pay all the closing costs. And so it's a great situation for if you, find folks that have been in the service and have VA eligibility, and it's easy to find that out. And I would, reach out to Jay. Jay's really good with the FHA loans, by the way. But anyway, you find out that they've got full eligibility, then they can do 100% financing and have the seller pay all the closing costs. FHA is what's called an insured loan, and that means that the government is ensuring that if for whatever reason the buyer doesn't make their payments, that whoever has lent the money is going to be made whole, right? And the insured loan, just so you know, there is what's called MIP, which is a mortgage insurance premium. And you can get a loan for X amount, say 3.5% down, and then you can finance the mortgage insurance premium back into your payment. So it doesn't have to be an upfront charge. But if you have the ability to pay it upfront or to get the seller to pay closing costs to pay it upfront, you can save yourself some money, one, and two, as your property appreciates and you get to a certain equity, you might have the ability to go back to the lender and have the mortgage insurance premium removed, but it's really an arduous process. So, so you got a guaranteed loan VA, insured loan FHA. But the biggest thing is that this all caps language here about appraisal, right? The appraised valuation is arrived at to determine the maximum mortgage the Department of Housing and Urban Development Department, or VA, will insure. HUD or VA does not warrant the value or the condition of the property. The purchaser should satisfy himself or herself that the price and condition of the property are acceptable. So what that means is that this contract is contingent on that appraisal. When you write a VA or an FHA contract, it's contingent on the appraisal. If the appraisal comes in for less than the contract price, it has to be negotiated. And if it can't be negotiated, the buyer has the right to get out of the contract. Now, how is that contrary to paragraph 5? There's no appraisal, and I think Jay shared this on Tuesday. There's no appraisal contingency in that finance commitment. There's nothing in that language. If you go back and read through paragraph 5, it says nothing about the appraisal. So what we want to do to protect our buyer, and especially if we haven't gotten an appraisal before the finance contingency needs to be removed, is either in paragraph 3 where it had other terms, if you remember, other financing terms, paragraph 3F, you could write in that this property must appraise at the contract price. Should it not appraise at the contract price, seller will reduce the price accordingly, or something like that. Or this contract is contingent on the property appraising at the contract price unless mutually agreed due to a low appraisal, buyer has the right to get out of the contract. So it can still be negotiable, you can work it out, but you want to have something in the contract that makes sure that your contract is contingent on appraisal, just like with paragraph 6, right? It's in the language here. And now the interesting thing is at the end of that line where it says does not warrant the value or condition of the property. I think that's interesting because when you have a VA or an FHA loan, you're going to get a VA or an FHA approved appraiser. And they actually have a tendency to be more persnickety as it relates to the property. They can actually appraise the property at the value, but they can tell you to replace the railing in the front porch. They could tell you that the falling down shingles need to be repaired or replaced. They can actually put in what are called conditions to the appraisal. And if they do put the conditions to the appraisal, that work has to be done before it can close. The lender will not be able to loan the money to the buyer without those conditions being removed. Okay, so you want to be careful of that. And again, if you're dealing with multiple contracts and one's a conventional, 90% loan to value deal, another one's a FHA or VA. Not that the FHA and VA aren't strong. It just that may be a reason why you pick the conventional one, because you're not going to have the issue with the appraisal that you might with a VA or an FHA loan. You want more information on VA and FHA? Absolutely. Grab a cup of coffee with Jay, and he's happy to walk you through those. So if a purchaser is obtaining VA financing and elects to complete the purchase at a purchase price in excess of the appraised value as established, purchaser will disclose the source of funds to the department and pay the excess. So what that's saying is that the lender, VA, endorsed lender, is going to want to make sure that the buyer is substantiating that they have the ability to make up any difference. All right. Any questions about that? That's just a quick overview. The biggest thing is knowing that when you have an FHA or VA loan, the appraisal language is here. with a conventional loan, we're going to want to put the appraisal language in either under 3F, or you could put it in paragraph, I think it's 31 of the contract. Yeah, 31 other terms. All right, then paragraph 7 talks about the loan fees. The loan fees being all points, loan origination fees, charges, and other costs imposed by a lender or otherwise incurred in connection with obtaining the loan or loans. So, loan origination fee is 1% of the loan amount. That's what that is, and that basically is what is how the lender and the loan officer and everybody gets paid. So if you got a $300,000 loan, the loan origination fee is $3,000. As an example, just for a rule of thumb, if you're working with a buyer and they say, okay, I'm going to buy this $400,000 house. I have 5% to put down, so $20,000. So my loan's going to be $380,000, right? How much am I going to need for closing costs? Well, the answer is twofold. The first first answer is, let's choose who you're going to use to close the property. Charlottesville Settlement, Bill Tucker, whoever it might be. Let's choose who you're going to close on the property. And when you sign on for them to handle the transaction for you, they will create a cost of sale estimate sheet. And that will give you a pretty good idea of what they charge and all the different things that you're going to have to pay as a buyer. But from a rule of thumb, I always say 3% of the sales price. So on that $400,000 property, the closing cost could be up to, just lost my train of thought there, $12,000, sorry. So you got the $20,000 they're putting down, they need another $12,000 for closing costs, right? Now, you might be able to get the seller to pay some of those. That's great if you can. The $12,000 includes these fees, right? Your loan origination fees, charges and other costs like pulling a credit report, ordering an appraisal. All of those things are what are considered loan fees, right? And it includes paragraph 8. Paragraph 8, title insurance. Title insurance. The lender is going to require you to buy title insurance for the loan. So again, they buy title insurance for $380,000, right? And it's like $7.50 plus $3 or $7.50 per, 100,000, no, per 1,000 plus $3.50, whatever it is. There's a cost that you're going to pay for the lender's title insurance. And that's required. You can't not do it. But what paragraph 8 is talking about is that you have the right to purchase, or your buyer has the right to purchase, owner's title insurance. All right. That's so important. Tell them that they want to talk to the attorney, talk to the closing company about title insurance, and let that closing company or the real estate attorney share with them what that's going to cost. You're paying the lender's part anyway, but there's above and beyond for the owners. The reason that's important is that the owner's part is protecting that $20,000 that you put down. That's your money, right? It's protecting your down payment. And then as the property starts appreciating, so let's just say for the sake of discussion, over the next 5 years, the property appreciates at 5%, 400 to 420, right? 420 to 442, 442 to 488, or you get my point. All of a sudden you're up to 500,000. Now you have $120,000 in equity because the loan amount is 380 or less. You want that $120,000 in equity protected, right? And that's what owner's title insurance does. And what is title insurance? All right. Depending on particular circumstance, transactions, such insurance shall include affirmative coverage against possible mechanics and material man's liens. That is like somebody did work on the property and the seller didn't pay him, said, I'm going to pay you at closing. They didn't pay him. And therefore the worker puts a mechanic's lien on the property. Your owners and lenders coverage fights that and gets that taken care of at no expense to you, right? Let's see. So mechanics liens, you may have a situation where the seller bought the house and paid the loan off, and the seller who they sold it to got the loan paid off. They sent it to that lender. The lender sends back what's called a certificate of satisfaction. And for whatever reason, the company that did the closing never went to the courthouse and put that in, so it removed that lien, the mortgage, the last mortgage. Following me? And so you go to sell the house or whatever the case may be, or the lender comes and says something about the fact that, hey, this was never paid off or whatever. Your owner's coverage is going to have somebody go in and check those land records and see, yes, that mortgage was paid off. And somebody needs to go in and remove that from the land records. And that is no cost to you because you have owner's coverage. The other reason that owner's coverage is so important is that as you pay down the loan, the lender coverage is going to become less and less, because as you pay down the loan, your equity is going to grow. The lender's responsibility is going to diminish. And again, you want to make sure that you are protecting your part of that. And another thing you want to talk to the closing company about, the real estate attorney, you don't have to get into this with your buyers. You shouldn't, because it's not really what we're supposed to be doing, but you want to be able to tell them, as you're explaining paragraph 8, is when we do write a contract and we do get you with a closing company or attorney, you're going to want title insurance and you're going to have options of either standard or enhanced coverage. Now, obviously enhanced means you're getting, more stuff, right? For purposes of owner's policy premium, purchaser's lender, if any purchaser and seller require that enhanced rates be quoted by the purchaser's lenders. Purchaser understands that nothing herein obligates purchaser to obtain the owner's title and coverage at any time, including its settlement, and that the availability of enhanced coverage is subject to underwriting criteria of the title insurer. So what this says is, you tell them that this is important. You tell them to get with the closing company or the attorney. They have the right to say, nah, I don't want it. I don't want to spend that $1,200. I don't want to spend that whatever amount of money it is. And that's their choice. I think it's the wrong choice. I think they're being, what is that called? Penny wise, but pound foolish. But that's their right. It's kind of like yesterday in the business meeting talking about home warranties, right? The buyer and seller have the right to say, no, I don't need a home warranty. But once something breaks and they're having to pay full freight to get it repaired or replaced, all of a sudden they say, dang, why didn't I do that? Why didn't I listen to my agent and get that kind of coverage? So any questions on that? Is that, at least from an overview standpoint, does that give you a little bit idea of what that is? Okay, so then we move on to settlement. Look how fast we're going this morning, all the way to paragraph 9 already. Then we go to the settlement. And again, the important part about this is settlement shall be made at where, all right? Who did we choose to handle the closing? And when you're working with a buyer, the buyer has a right to choose whoever they want to use. And then the seller has the right to either use that same company or to get their own representation. But we're going to put in who we're going to choose. And that's why it's good to have a working relationship with Charlottesville Settlement. And by the way, we're going to set up, I'm going to do it through Beth Ann. We're going to set up soon a time for you to go over to Charlottesville Settlement, and they'll like serve lunch and walk through a settlement with you to have you understand all these different things and the cost of the estimate of costs and the things that the buyers and sellers are going to sign at the time of closing. So we'll get that done here soon. I just talked to Katie West about it yesterday. But anyway, so settlement shall be made at Charlottesville Settlement, Tucker, Griffin and Barnes, Roy McGamick, so whoever you're using, right? On or about. Circle that, those 3 words, on or about. Because on or about puts you in the gray. On or about means, let's say today, well, let's not say it is. Today is February 9th and you write a contract and your buyer wants to close in 45 days. So February 9th to March 9th, that's 30. So March 24th. So we're going to put in on or about March 24th, 2023. On or about does not mean March 23, or March 24th. It means on or about March 24th. So when you do get to a place where you're actually getting your closing date scheduled, March 24th, 2 p.m. or whatever, you're going to want to send something to the seller saying closing will occur on March 24th at 2 p.m. at Charlottesville Settlement or at blah, 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 right? And so you're making it clear that that is when we're going to close. But let's just say that there's some glitches, something goes wrong or whatever. This is where we go from the black and the white to the gray. Because on or about means that, let's just say for the sake of discussion, the seller isn't able to get out of the house on the 24th. They're not gonna be able to get out until the 26th. And the buyer said, but you said the 24th. No, we said on or about the 24th. So you get in a situation where you got to negotiate and figure out exactly when closing is going to occur. If your buyer or the seller really wants to change this, then you would change on or about to made at blank on, you would cross out or about, and you would put in March 24th, 2023. And then you would put time is of the essence. Time is of the essence. So we're going to settle on a certain date. Time is of the essence. Time is of the essence means that that's the date that it's going to happen. And if it doesn't, it has to be agreed to by both parties to get it changed. On or about is a little bit, loosey-goosey, right? And then this is really important because this is something that has changed just in the last little bit. Settlement means the time when the settlement agent is the agent that the buyer chooses. They're the ones who are kind of handling all of the ins and outs of the closing. Seller may ask for somebody to represent them, but if the seller has somebody representing them, all they're pretty much doing is recording the deed and reviewing the documents to make sure that the buyer is doing what they said in the contract. But the settlement agent is the person that the buyer chose. And when that settlement agent receives the fully executed deed, from the other attorney, all the funds from the lender, all the loan documents, and other documents and funds required to carry out the terms of the contract, other documents and funds. Well, funds would be that that $20,000 down payment. That's going to need to be wired in. It's about the loan fees, the $12,000 in loan fees. Those have to be wired in. All of that stuff comes in to carry out the terms of the contract between the parties, and the settlement agent reasonably determines the pre-recording condition of such contracts have been satisfied. So all the things that have to happen, all the things that we just talked about, the deed, the funds, the loan documents, other documents, down payment, closing cost information, all that's in. Seller signs off the deed, transferring title from them to the new buyer. Buyer gets handwriter's insurance because they're going to sign all sorts of documents, and some of them are redundant. You may sign the same thing, it feels like 3 or 4 times, but you sign all those. Once all those paperwork is signed, then we have what's called the pre-recordation conditions of the contract have been met. What does that mean? It means that possession of the property, which includes transfer of keys to purchaser, shall occur at settlement unless otherwise agreed. So if all these things that we just talked about are done, then the buyer should expect to be able to get the keys and move in. Recordation is when the settlement agent takes all those documents to the county or the city courthouse and records that new deed into the land records. That's really when the thing officially has closed. But this language here has made it so that on a Thursday, where all these other things have met, the buyer can expect to get the keys so that they can start moving in on Friday and over the weekend, right? And so just another little quick note to make: when you're representing the seller, one, and we'll talk about this later, but do not let them turn off the utilities on the day of closing, because that buyer has the right to go back in and do a walkthrough that day, and all the utilities need to be in place. Now, if the buyer has let them know that they've transferred the utilities, that's fine. But don't just, okay, it's March 24th, I'm turning off the utilities, right? And secondly, do not cancel your homeowner's insurance. And the way that I like to do this is to say to them, do not cancel your homeowner's insurance until you get your money, till you actually get the funds from the closing. Because when you get the funds, that absolutely means that the property has been recorded properly right? And the deed has been transferred from them to the new buyer, so they no longer own it. This is a little tidbit you can give them that most agents won't tell them, and it makes you look good, is, you hold on to your hazard insurance. You send the disclosure, the settlement disclosure to your insurance company saying, please cancel my homeowner's insurance on 114 Bingham Terrace, right? Here's a substantiation of the fact that I no longer own that property. They will go back and prorate. So let's say today's February 9th. Say you closed on February 5th or 6th. They will go back and give you a rebate prorated back onto the day it closed, even though you didn't notify them till today. They will go back with right substantiation, and they will send you whatever hazard insurance they have gotten up front back to you, including those 4 days. It's not a lot of money, but it is money, and it's you telling them that they have that option. But I just think it's really important for them not to cancel the hazard insurance until they have their money, because you don't want to have a situation where it didn't get recorded on a Friday and over the weekend a tree falls on the house, right? And now you're in a situation where was it actually owned by the new buyer? Blah blah blah. You're counseling them to a worst case scenario. All right, that makes sense. All right. Another thing here, at settlement, seller will deliver the deed. Talked about that, described in paragraph 15. Obviously, we'll get to that. An affidavit acceptable to purchaser and purchaser's title insurance as to parties in possession and mechanics liens, applicable foreign status and state residence certificates, and applicable IRS 1099 certificates. So basically what we're doing here, the seller's agreeing that they're going to sign whatever needs to be signed to say, as best as I know, there are no mechanics liens that are going to be recorded on this property. As best as I know, they're going to sign something and say, I don't have non-foreign status, right? And they're going to sign off on it. The other thing they're going to do, and again, important for the seller to know, is they're going to sign an affidavit that says there's no other financing other than what is in these documents. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means that the seller can't be, doing like a silent second trust to help the buyer with their down payment without everybody knowing it. And if they did something like that and signed an affidavit, they could be charged with fraud and misrepresentation and all those kind of things. You just don't want to do that. So, if you hear that, they're doing anything like that as it relates to the financing of the property, just remind them that there's going to be a federal affidavit that they're going to have to sign saying that didn't happen. Just something that doesn't happen very often, but especially right now with interest rates, at 6 or thereabouts, some of these FHA and VA loans that were taken at 3%, well, they become, somewhat attractive because those can be assumed, right? We talked about that in paragraph 3. Those can be assumed, and you can have second trust in that situation, a seller second trust. So using the example again, that somebody bought the house at 400 and appreciated at 5% a year for a couple of years. So now it's at, what did I do before 5%? 462 and 5%, 470 or 480. It says 480. So it went up, no, it wouldn't go that good. 10%, 420, 440, and their loan amount's 380. A buyer who has $60,000 could put down $60,000 and assume that $380,000 loan at 3%. That's a good deal. Somebody's got a down payment and they've got that amount of money, and they can assume that lower interest rate. That could be from your perspective as a selling agent or listing agent, that'd be a great marketing tool. Property is fully assumable. And if let's just say somebody had $30,000, they may have 60, right? The seller, if they wanted to, could put in a second trust. Now, they could sign the affidavit because it's going to be in paragraph 3 that they took out a $30,000 second trust for 5 years at interest only, blah, blah. So then the buyer puts $30,000 in plus their closing costs. The seller puts $30,000 in a second trust, and the FHA or VA loan gets assumed. All right, does that make sense? You with me? All right, so the point of that being, that would be fine as far as the affidavits that they're gonna sign, because it's in the contract. It's not outside the contract. It's not something that's being done, behind the scenes. Where it could be behind the scenes, like I already said, is it could be just a regular conventional loan when somebody's says they're gonna put $60,000 down, but they get the seller silently to say, I'll give you 30 and you can pay me back, right? And they don't tell the lender that. That's not a good thing. All right. Questions on any of that? All right, so we get to paragraph 10. Paragraph 10, basically talking about what I just talked about. There are different things that are going to be prorated. The housing insurance is prorated back to when it closes, right? Property owners, homeowners association dues. You may pay those dues quarterly, and you might close in the middle of that quarter. The seller is going to get, 6 weeks back of what they paid, and the buyer is going to pay for those 6 weeks, right? Because the buyer's now in the property on May 15th. Well, let's say April 15th, because that would be in the middle of the quarter. The seller is going to get 6 weeks of money back from April 15th to June 1st or May 31st. The buyer is now going to pay that money. The buyer's now going to pay that money as part of the closing so that the seller gets paid. So homeowner insurance, condominium fees. We talked about hazard insurance. Your escrow from your loan. You've got money in the escrow, and when the thing closes, the money that hasn't been spent on real estate taxes, like that, the buyer's going to get that, and the seller's going to get that money back, right? Usually over a 30, 45 year. But the thing I really want to touch base on that is in here that a lot of people don't see is, first, it says all taxes, assessments, interest, rent, escrow deposits, and other ownership fees, if any, shall be prorated. And then the in addition, circle in addition, right? Because that says here, and a lot of people don't know this, and so they get bit on the butt with it, is the purchaser agrees to pay seller for all fuel, oil, and or propane remaining in the tanks, if applicable, at the prevailing rate, market price as of the date of settlement, right? So if you don't have that in there, and you could have had a flawless transaction, everything went just the way you wanted, but you get to closing and your buyer is given a $1,200 fuel oil bill. Because what the seller did is they filled their 300-gallon fuel oil tank up at the current market rate, right? So say, I don't know what fuel oil is, isn't it? $4 or $5 a gallon. That's $1,200 to $1,500 that the buyer wasn't expecting. Now, the buyer's going to need it. Buyer's going to have to use fuel oil during the winter, but especially right now at this time of year, it doesn't feel like we're having a winter. Knock on wood, because I can tell you that my daughter was born on March 13th, and I know we canceled at least 3 birthday parties due to snow. I'm not saying that winter's over, but my point being is I may not have to use all 300 gallons of that fuel oil for this winter. And so that $1,200, $1,500 is a lot of money when I'm trying to get into a house. So you just want to make sure your buyer understands, and you work with the listing agent in regards to how we're going to get that done. Is it they're going to put a big yardstick in there and they're going to say that there are 80 gallons in there and multiply by, $4, so it's $320, or are they going to fill it up so that they know it's full and can say, okay, I'm conveying to you 300 gallons of fuel oil, right? Or propane tank or whatever the case may be. All right. And then B, seller shall pay no more than blank in conjunction with escrow, closing, or settlement services as defined in Virginia code. Now, what this is, this goes back to what I was just talking about a few minutes ago about the settlement agent, right? The law says that the settlement agent is the person that your buyer chose, like we talked about. The settlement agent is responsible for all of the things that we talked about in paragraph 9 about, to pre-record, getting all the paperwork, doing all the numbers, making sure the loan money comes in, down payment money, all that through the settlement agent, right? In Charlottesville, and I always have to do this, I don't have to do this when I'm teaching in other parts of the state, but in Charlottesville, our tradition here, the way customary standard operating procedure is that both the buyer and the seller have separate closing entities. Back in March, gosh, it's been almost a year now. It's hard to believe. Back in March, the Bureau of Insurance clarified what the settlement agent was supposed to be. And all of the work was supposed to be done on the buyer's closing company attorney's side of the ledger. Whereas before, the seller was doing some of those things, the seller representative was doing some of those things and then sending those things to the buyer agent. And that's the way, in other parts of the state, that's the way it's done. The buyer chooses a closing company and both the buyer and the seller show up at the same date, the same time, around the same table. Seller signs off on their paperwork they have to sign, they leave, and then the buyer does the rest. Well, here, that's not the case. Seller signs off in one place, buyer signs off in another place. So it created a little bit of angst. What you need to know, as far as paragraph 10B is concerned, is that the seller should not have to pay more than $250, and that's the number that we've been advised to put in there. $250 in conjunction with escrow, closing, or settlement services as defined in Virginia Code, unless otherwise specified in writing. So what that means is, if the seller is going to use the person that the buyer chose, and the seller is going to allow the buyer representative settlement agent to do those things, they can't charge them more than $250 unless it's otherwise approved in writing. That doesn't have anything to do with purchaser will pay any costs in excess of the amount charged to the settlement agent. If no amounts entered in space, parties agree the amount entered in the blank shall be zero. So 250. This does not mean, though, that if the buyer has chosen closure settlement and our seller has chosen Tucker, Griffin, and Barnes, this is saying that the seller is not going to be charged more than $250 by closure. That doesn't mean that Tucker, Griffin, and Barnes is not going to charge for the writing up of the deed and reviewing the documents and things like that. So it's going to be additional expense. So the important part of this paragraph, right, and that's what it says after that, seller reserves the right to retain an attorney of their choosing and at their expense draft the deed, represent the seller by providing services, blah, blah, blah. So the important thing to remember about this is why you want to have somebody on your team, right? So we talk about one-stop shopping, right? We talk about Jay Dominic at Town Mortgage, and we know that he's going to do a good job and that people are going to be pleased with working with him. We have Ednam Title. Ednam Title, Charlottesville Settlement is under Ednam Title. Tucker, Griffin, and Barnes, Jeff Early, Paige Williams, who's pretty much retired. There's a number of attorneys that are, and we have that paperwork here, right? The point being is you want to have the people that you think would be best for your buyer to use. And because you use them, you can pretty much be able to tell them what they can expect from them in regards to what the charges are. But going back again to what we talked about before about choosing in settlement in paragraph 9 and choosing that person right away, you're going to send them, your buyer, to those people and let them give them an engagement letter so that they understand exactly what they're going to be charged. No surprises, at closing, right? And again, that last little paragraph is saying, yes, you have the right to be, a seller has the right to choose an attorney at their expense. And quite honestly, most people would say you could choose another settlement company. The law uses the word attorney, so that's created some little bit of a problem. But pretty much what I've seen from a standpoint of the people that have written about this, there doesn't seem to be any issue that the seller chooses a closing company. The only problem with that is Charlottesville Settlement has Bill Tucker and Larry McElwain as general counsel, and so they can draft the deed, right? Some of the settlement companies may not have somebody that does that, right? So you got to be careful about that. But the bottom line is, whoever you choose, you can't choose them too late that in any way that it would delay closing. And then the last thing in paragraph 10, as it relates to rollback taxes, and this would be, Teresa, this is something for you to know for sure with where you live. We have a lot of land selling, and right now, golly day, it's really interesting that there's just a frenetic interest in vacant land right now. Steve White was texting me last night about, it's pretty cool. He had five lots listed along this one road on Chapman Road. They're now all under contract. And the really cool thing is they're all under contract with our agents. We have 3 or 4 of our agents. I think one of the agents had 2 lots and then 2 or 3 other agents. All of them were sold by Howard Hanna agents representing the buyers. So that was kind of a cool thing, an anomaly, but it was pretty cool. But the point being is, when you're selling vacant land, you need to understand that land may be in some sort of land use, right? And that land use may be deferring tax liability, reducing the tax cost because they're using it agriculturally or they're using it for whatever the case may be. And when they sell the property, then what happens is a tax event happens. And that tax event is the taxes that had been deferred, had been rolled back, had been pushed back because of certain zoning, now comes right back to the front. And somebody's going to owe that money. The county's going to be looking for that money because it's being sold and it's going to be taken out of land use. And therefore, the taxes that have been delayed are now going to be due and payable. And so letter C is who's paying them. And in most situations, you're going to put in there, rollback taxes shall be paid as follows. If there are rollback taxes, seller will pay. You're going to put that on the seller. If the seller doesn't want that, fine, then you're going to negotiate and figure something out. There's 2 rules. There's 2 rules of thumb there, right? I'm not taking that. I'm selling it. But if you choose to, develop the 3 division rights on it and turn it from agricultural into residential, and you're changing the zoning, and so those taxes are, why should I have to pay that? That's your decision. That's your choice. But anyway, seller shall be paid as follows. Seller to pay, if any, is sort of the default there. I will tell you, this is important because last year, 2 years ago now, we had one of these where it didn't get put in, and the other agent kind of manipulated and finessed it, and we ended up having to pay a portion of what the seller owed because we had not written it in or gotten it resolved. Now, personally, and again, this is I think the attorney was the one at fault. Attorney was the one who was representing the seller. The attorney's the one who was supposed to have reviewed the contract. The attorney was the one who let it close, knowing that it was an issue. I still don't understand. Somehow that attorney got off scot-free, and the seller and us had to make up the difference. But anyway, rollback taxes, seller, if any. And then the next one, number 11, right? Brokerage fees, settlement statements. Again, we're authorizing and directing the settlement agent to disperse to listing company and selling company from the settlement proceeds to the respective portions of the brokerage fee payable as a result of the sale and closing under the contract. So what this is saying is that the seller and the purchaser, the principals of the contract, are saying to their settlement agent, or to the settlement agent, the one the buyer has chosen, that they want you to disperse, they want them to disperse to the listing company, to the selling company, the money that we have earned because of the closing as a result. What it doesn't say, and then let's see. Yeah, and then it goes on to talk about the listing company and selling company will deliver the settlement agent prior to selling a signed written statement setting forth the fee to which such company is entitled and stating how much the fee and additional sales expenses are to be dispersed. So here's a place that we screw up all the time. So we get a contract and we send what we call a commission disbursement fee to the settlement agent that says that we're to be paid 3%. And that's the way it is. It's set up that way. But then you have a home inspection where all of a sudden there's some problems and some issues, and we make a decision because of the scenario that we're going to pay $500 toward the purchaser's closing cost to help offset issues that happen in the home inspection. But we never tell the settlement agent that happened. We sent the stuff in like we're supposed to. We get to closing. And on the disclosure, it talks about 3% coming to Howard Hanna Roy Wheeler. Well, it's not 3% is coming, but it's going to be minus $500. Or probably more commonplace is you'll see in listings, when you're searching them and you go in the agent comments, it will say commission to be paid on seller's net sales price. So the offered compensation is 3%. Using our $400,000 example again, that's $12,000. But the seller agreed, as we talked about earlier, to pay 3% of the purchase closing costs. So instead of 400, the net to the seller is 388. And what that agent remark said was the 388, they're going to pay 3% on 388. And we need to make sure we tell the settlement company that, because they're going to see 3%. But in fact, it's 3%. It's pennies, dollars, but it's still, it has to be changed. And there's nothing more frustrating than when we haven't done our job. The other thing, going back to escrow agreement and an escrow deposit, which was paragraph 4, using again the $400,000. And I don't mean to be beat. I'm just trying to give you things that can happen. You're writing a contract on a $400,000 property, and you want to make sure your contract looks better than anybody else's, and so you write a earnest money check for $20,000, 5% of what you're offering. Okay, you with me? So $20,000. The compensation to us is $12,000. So guess what? If we haven't put the earnest money with the closing company, which I've told you is a really good idea, another reason why to go to paragraph 9, know who your buyer's going to use, so you can write the earnest money check to Charlottesville Settlement or to Tucker Griffin versus to Howard Hanna Roy Wheeler. But let's just say for the sake of discussion, we are holding that earnest money, which again, you have to get to us within 5 business days or 3 business days, so we can get it deposited within 5, right? That $20,000 is more than what we're going to be compensated for. Another big mistake we make is we forget that. And so we get to closing, and the closing company says, hey, you owe us $8,000 because we're going to send you 12. So keep that, but we need a check for $8,000 to offset that 20,000. You with me? So what you want to do is, if you have a $20,000 earnest money and you know you're only be compensated at 12,000, you want to put something in your calendar, remind you to get with Mary, at least 3 or 4 business days in advance to ask for that $8,000 to be wired to the settlement company. You don't want to be telling her at 10 o'clock in the morning because you have a closing at 2. Ain't going to happen. And so we can be part of the problem in regards to people then getting their money. So you want to make a note in your calendar that 3 or 4 days in advance, we need to send something. The closing's going fine, everything's good. So now we're going to send something to say, please wire 8,000, because all you have to wire is 8, because we're going to be keeping 12 anyway. So the settlement agent just won't send that to us because we already have it. And on the disclosures, the buyer and seller, it'll show that. It'll show 400,000, 3% to Howard Hanna, and it'll show this $8,000 coming from Howard Hanna Roy Wheeler to the buyer's side of the ledger as money that they gave us in advance. Let's see here. Yeah, and then the last line is really important. A lot of I shouldn't say a lot, some closing companies and attorneys forget this, that the contract says that the seller and purchaser authorize and direct the settlement agent to provide to each of seller, purchaser, listing company, and selling company a copy of the closing disclosure for the transaction. So when we get the commission check, and another thing I would encourage you to do if you have a closing, don't let them mail it. The mail is just not, is not guaranteed. So just say, would you please call me and I'll come by and pick up the check? Because the nice thing about our company is you pick up the check, you bring it to Mary. Mary has a check scanner here. She can scan that check and immediately goes to Virginia Beach. And because you've got direct deposit, it immediately goes into your bank account. And usually within 2 days of when you've given us the check, you'll see it in your account. But when we get that, we want to get a copy of the closing disclosure so we can put that in our files. All right. Questions on any of that? All right. hit these 12 and 13, and then I think we'll stop because 14 I know will take us a little bit of time. Basically, 12 is saying that the seller and purchaser can't hold us liable to anything unless we've done something negligently. So we can't be held liable for any delay or an expense caused by such a delay. And so what this is saying is you can't, your buyer, your seller can't start pointing fingers at you and saying, hey, this thing got delayed, and therefore we want you to help us pay for a hotel room or for storage unit space or whatever the case may be. Very clear in the contract that they're agreeing to hold us harmless for any delay or expense caused by such a delay in settlement due to regulatory or legal requirements. Well, what could happen? Well, example. A few years ago, they changed the regulations that this is why we want to make sure our commission disbursement is correct. This is why we want to make sure our prorations are correct, because if for some reason there is a change to the cost to the buyer, and I think it's more than 3%, don't hold me to that, but I think it's more than 3% change. The contract or the settlement has to be delayed by 3 days so that the buyer can understand how they're going to resolve that 3%. It can be 3% good, 3% bad, but it's a scenario where if it kicks in, you can't waive it, right? And so if that happens due to some regulatory or legal requirement, we can't be held responsible for that. They're going to hold us harmless to that. And the same thing, going back to risk of loss. All risk of loss or damage to the property by fire, windstorm, casualty, or other causes assumed by the seller until closing, right? This is what I was talking about before. Keep your hazard insurance in place until you get your money. Because if you got your money, that means it's recorded. Do not cancel your homeowner insurance on the day of closing. Just because of the example I said earlier, you close on a Thursday, you think it's going to be recorded. It's not recorded. Buyers move in, they're in there on the weekend and a tree falls on the house, right? You just don't want to be put in that position where you don't have coverage. In the event of substantial damage or loss or damage to the property before settlement shall have the option of either one, terminating the contract. Oh my gosh, I don't want to have to wait through you guys dealing with the insurance, getting the tree off the roof, getting that done, making sure that it's still structurally sound, blah, blah. So they can either terminate the contract, recover their deposit, or two, they can affirm this contract, meaning I'm going to go forward with the contract, in which event seller shall assign to purchaser all of seller's rights under any policy or policies of insurance applicable to the property. If your buyer wants to move forward and wants to affirm the contract, man, you want to have an attorney helping you with that. You want to make sure that you are in the right spot with that insurance company. Everything is the way it's going to be, because what you don't want to do is think that you've gotten everything in place, and then the insurance company saying, well, you're not the person who had the policy, blah, blah. So if you're going to affirm it, there's got to be a lot of written substantiation done that makes the buyer comfortable after having seeking legal advice to move forward with that. And you want them to seek legal advice, not your advice in that situation. Because if it's done wrong, you don't want that to come back on you. You want to be able to say, look, I gave you your options. I said that, your relationship with your attorney is the way to go with this, and then leave it at that. All right. Any questions or input you want to give us? We're going to stop there. And we will continue with paragraph 14 when we get back together next Tuesday. So helpful? Good. All right. Well, listen. Have a great day, and we'll get this recording posted in the Agent Only Facebook page and also on the Agent Hub if you want to review it. So take it from there. See you later.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye.
my pleasure. See you later. Hey, Shannon, did you win a $1 or $2 lottery ticket yesterday?
Sorry, I think it was 2, maybe.
Yeah, that's what I think. You got 2, and then Dana got 1, and Logan got 1, I think. So, all right.
I can swing by the office tomorrow if you want to.
I'll put it in your mailbox. I'll put it in your mailbox. All
All
right,
right, thank you.
take care.
Bye.